Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining me after a week's pause over Pesach. We're jumping a regel. We've just been through Pesach and now we're coming straight into Sukkot. So with nothing in between. That's what learning Gemara is like. But there you are. It was interesting, actually, the day after Pesach, of course, we learned Achrei Mot, and that's all about Yom Kippur. So I mentioned to the Baal Korah that we were jumping from Pesach to Yom Kippur. Now we're moving from Yom Kippur to Sukkot. We were already just about in a topic which we are going to study in greater detail today. It's very much more a topic which is of practical significance and general interest than some of the other more esoteric subjects that we've been studying up to now in this Masechta, because we're going to be dealing really with just going to spotlight a second. We'll be dealing with brachot, the brachot that we make over the sukkah, over the lulav, including shechianu. And it's going to take us into a study and discussion about brachot in general, because some of the principles that apply to the brachot that we make for the lulav and for the sukkah are general principles which are applicable elsewhere. This is really a fundamental discussion we'll get in the Gemara here. Many of the details are already known to all of us because we practice them. Some of them we'll see are suggestions of halachot that we have dismissed, that we don't practice, but other ones are ones that we know and take for granted. But here we have the fundamental discussions in the Gemara. You have to remember that the Gemara itself is the source for the Shulchan Aruch eventually, and therefore what we do today in terms of practice is derived from these discussions in the Gemara. So I'm going to take you to Mem Vav Amud Aleph, that's 46a, and we're going to start from, just try and find the right page, I'm on the wrong page at the moment. It's 45b, actually. I'm going to start from Mem Hey Amud Beis, and in my email I actually attached two sheets, but if you're looking at it in the Gemara, it's Mem Hey Amud Beis, and we're going to start 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 lines from the bottom. The last two words on the line are Omer Rav, and then we have Yehuda on the next line. Omer Rav Yehuda, Omer Shmuel. And this is where the discussion starts in regard to the brachot that we make on the mitzvahs of Sukkah, or of Sukkot in general. So Omer Rav Yehuda, Omer Shmuel. Rav Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel. He reports in the name of Shmuel, the Omer Shmuel. And we're going to find that we are into some machlokasim over here, some disputes in terms of what bracha we make and when. So Rav Yehuda says in the name of Shmuel, lulav shiva, v'sukkah yom echad. When it comes to making brachot, we make the bracha on the lulav, which we know, and later on the Gemara is actually going to give us the nusach of the bracha, val netilat lulav. We make that bracha, lulav shiva. We make the bracha all 7 days, which means every day is a fresh day. When we take up the lulav and esrog, we make another bracha. But the sukkah is just yom echad. So according to this opinion, which is certainly not the opinion that we follow in halacha, one only makes a bracha on the sukkah the very first time one goes into the sukkah, which might be on the night of the first day. Having made that bracha, if you like, that bracha lasts us all the way through. And on all subsequent days, when we go into the sukkah, we have no more brachot to make of leishef b'sukkah. There's only a single leishef b'sukkah. That's the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel, and he'll give his reasoning for it in a moment as well. And he says, my tama, what is the reason, says Shmuel, that I suggest you only make the sukkah as a one-off bracha, whereas on lulav you make it as a daily bracha? And here's his svara, his reasoning. Lulav demifsaki leilot miyamim. When it comes to lulav, the nights and days are separated from each other. And kol yuma mitzvah b'pei nafshehu. Therefore, every individual day we take the lulav is a separate mitzvah all of its own. In contrast, sukkah, delo mitzvah leilot miyomim. When it comes to the mitzvah of sitting in the sukkah, where the nights do not interrupt from the days, they don't break up the days. Kulo shiva kachad yom arichad domi. All 7 days are considered to be like one continuous mitzvah continuum, like one long mitzvah. What is he saying over here? There's a radical difference between the background of the mitzvah of sitting in the sukkah and the mitzvah of the lulav and esrog. Shmuel is saying the mitzvah of lulav and esrog is a distinct, punctuated mitzvah. Every day is a new mitzvah. Why do we say every day is a new mitzvah? Why don't we also say, well, make a bracha on the first day of Sukkot, so you don't have to make another bracha on the lulav? The answer is that the nights of Sukkot, there is no mitzvah of netilat lulav. There is no mitzvah of taking a lulav at nighttime. In other words, the lulav is only, the mitzvah of lulav is just a daytime lulav. If you've missed the mitzvah of a lulav one day, and you come home at midnight, you cannot make the bracha on the lulav and esrog anymore. It doesn't apply to you anymore. Therefore, every day is a distinct day. We start from scratch because it was interrupted from the previous day by the intervening night, where there was no mitzvah. And so it's logical to say that since each mitzvah, therefore, has become isolated from the days before, there should be a separate bracha for each day's taking of the lulav and esrog. Contrast that with the sukkah. In the sukkah, the mitzvah doesn't come to an end at night time at all, because, in fact, one of the major mitzvahs of Leisha Basukkah is actually sleep in the sukkah. One's supposed to spend one's time in the sukkah, and there's no interruption of the mitzvah by night. It's not a question of you sit in the sukkah during the day and then you might as well go in and sleep at home. Well, many of us do, but in fact, the formal mitzvah continues to apply in full force during the night. And therefore, since it's not a punctuated mitzvah, it's a mitzvah which is a continuum that applies from the evening of the first day up to the end of the 7th day. The mitzvah that you make at the beginning lasts you all the way through. And therefore, you only need to make one bracha, Leisha Basukkah, says Rav Yehuda in the name of Shmuel, when you first go into the sukkah on the first night of Sukkot. It's a remarkable piece of mental reasoning, but it's a very logical piece of reasoning nevertheless, and that differentiates one mitzvah from the other. You can see over here a principle emerging, and certainly in terms of Shmuel, that a mitzvah which is unpunctuated and continuous, you only make a one first time bracha on, whereas a mitzvah which is punctuated, if you like, in other words, there are intervening periods where there is no mitzvah, you make a separate bracha each time. That's the principle which Shmuel is espousing over here. But that's only one opinion. We're going to see that there are going to be 3 opinions. Three sages, 3 opinions. And we'll try and work out why they differ. And they all make some level of sense. And the halacha eventually, obviously, has to come through in terms of our practice. But the second opinion we're going to see stated now. Rabba bar bar Chana Omar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabba bar Chana said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. So this is said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan and not in the name of Shmuel. It's a disputing opinion. He says the opposite. Sukkah Shiva. The bracha that you make when you sit in the sukkah, you should make a separate bracha every day. That is, each day you go into the sukkah, you make another bracha. And the first bracha you make on the first evening doesn't last you. Contrast, the lulav, when it comes to the bracha on the lulav, yom echad, that's a one-time bracha. You make it only on the first day that you take lulav. Day 1, you make your tilas lulav, and even though there are intervening nights, makes no difference. You don't have to say it again on day 2, day 3, day 4, etc., etc. This is the diametric opposite opinion to the one we explained before in the name of Shmuel. And he also gives us reasoning. Clearly, his reasoning isn't going to be the same as the previous reasoning because his halacha is the reverse. So his reasoning is completely different. My tama, why do I say what I say in terms of lulav one day only and the sukkah every day? Because lulav d'Rabbanan, the mitzvah of lulav, the subsequent days of Sukkot are only Drabbanan. Again, remember, we're talking here about not at the time of the Beis HaMikdash, we're talking about the way in which Chazal understood the Pasuk, which is that it's only Lifnei Hashem Elokeichem Shivas Yomin, that you only take the Lulav and Esrog min HaTorah 7 days when you're in Yerushalayim, or according to one opinion, when you're in the Beis HaMikdash. Otherwise, the mitzvah that we do nowadays, according to this opinion, which is a generally accepted opinion, is that only day 1 is min HaTorah, of Lulav and Esrog, and the other days are sort of Zeichel HaMikdash. They're sort of to remind us of what they used to do, which means day 1 only is min HaTorah, and the other days are midrabanan. So says Rabbi Yochanan, according to this view, you only have to say the bracha on the first day for the Lulav, because on the first day there's a mitzvah min HaTorah to take the Lulav and Esrog. That's the Yom HaRishon. Since the other days are rabbinic, you don't have to make a bracha. You do the mitzvah. You don't have to make a bracha to fulfill a mitzvah drabana, and you fulfill the mitzvah without a separate bracha, because it's a lower order mitzvah than it is on day 1. Only day 1 is a Torah mitzvah. There is a lot of discussion on this, because we do actually make, and our halacha is that we make brachas even on mitzvahs drabana, Chanukah and Purim and various things. We make halacha on Megillah and all these sorts of things. They're mitzvahs drabana, and we make brachas on them, don't we? So why are we saying over here, according to this opinion, that on the subsequent days, from 2 to 7 onwards, since it's Rabbanon, there is no bracha? It seems that according to Rabbi Yochanan, he has a different view of this, that if it's Rabbanon, it doesn't need a bracha. You have to hold like that to understand his opinion. And therefore, when it comes to Lulav, only day 1 is min HaTorah, only day 1 needs a bracha. And what about Sukkah? So, Sukkah is d'oraisa min HaTorah all 7 days. We know that. There is no Yom Rishon only in relation to Sukkah. The Torah's the posuk that from which we learn day 1 only is to do with the Lekachton Yechem Yom Rishon. It's the Lulav and Esrog and the Hadas and the Arava that the posuk applies to. When it comes to Sukkah, there's no differentiation between days, today or ever, and therefore it's always 7 days min HaTorah. Therefore, according to this opinion, since it's min HaTorah all 7 days, it requires a bracha for each of those days. What happened to the previous reasoning that the night doesn't interrupt the day, etc., etc.? It seems that Rabbi Baba Chana and then Rabbi Yochanan doesn't use that line of logic. As far as he's concerned, we differentiate between Lulav and the mitzvah of Sukkah only in relation to whether it's min HaTorah or drabana. Now that's his criteria to differentiate whether one bracha suffices or whether you need to make a bracha for each day. So that's the second opinion. So we have a machlokus. Which one is a 1-day bracha only? Which one's a 7-day bracha? Depends upon which of these two views you follow that we've so far enunciated. Just to make it clear again, both of them. Sorry. Let me go on before we get the comment I wanted to say. So we had a dispute, one between Rabbi Yehuda in the name of Shmuel and one Rabbi Bar Chana in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. The Gemara now goes on to say, Ki osa Rabin is the first word of the penultimate line on the page. Ki osa Rabin. When Ravin was an Amora, when he came to Bavel from Eretz Yisrael, Ravin was one of those commuting Amoron who came and brought the Torah of Eretz Yisrael, if you like, the Talmud Yerushalmi discussions to Bavel. And then he came back to Eretz Yisrael and he created this link between one of the number of Amoron, created this link in communication and exchange of Torah between the two great academies, the academies in Bavel and the academies in Eretz Yisrael. So Ki Asa, when he came from Bavel to Eretz Yisrael, he got involved in this discussion about which is a 1-day bracha and which is a 7-day bracha. And he said, he said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. In other words, this is another view in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. And he went to Bavel where he was in touch with Rabbi Yochanan. And he said, Echad zeh ve'echad zeh shiva. Whether the first day whether Lulav or the mitzvah of Sukkah, the bracha is always said each of the 7 days. So that's a third opinion now. So you can either say 1 day bracha, 7-day bracha, 7-day bracha, 1 day bracha, or 7-day and 7-day for the 2 mitzvot, the mitzvah of lulav and sukkah. Anything you do basically seems to be okay, would fall in line with one of these opinions. The 7-day and 7-day one actually is what we do in practice. We make a bracha on the lulav, this third opinion, each day, and we make a bracha on the sukkah each day. In fact, we do more than that, as all the Mefarshim point out. We don't just make a bracha once in the sukkah. In fact, when you leave the sukkah, if you were to come back later on to the sukkah on the same day, you make the bracha again. So the subsequent discussion in halacha has broadened this concept of, if you like, iterating the bracha each time you meet the mitzvah. Even though it's a continuous mitzvah, we actually do the brachas more than once a day. If you just stay in the sukkah and all day, maybe you'd make the bracha once. Or if you had another meal, maybe you first mitzvah, second, you make the bracha again. But the Gemara only refers to the bracha being made once during the day, even for sukkah, each day during the sukkah. So this is Rav in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. I'll just share my screen with you for a moment. So a bit of chazar. I've done a table over here. And if you look at the table, on the column I have the name of the sages and the 2 mitzvot, lulav and sukkah. And we've just said the first opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, the name of Shmuel. He said all 7 days for the lulav, day 1 only for the sukkah. Rabbi Bar Chana in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, I've done that for a particular reason. He says day 1 only for the lulav and all 7 days for the sukkah. And this final opinion, Ravin in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, 7 days, 7 days, 7 days for both the mitzvah of lulav and sukkah. Okay, just stop sharing. So we're at a loss knowing what we should do, but the Gemara gives you a little bit of advice now. So Amar Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef said the following: Nekot de Rabba Bar Chana beyodecha, which literally means hold on to the view, if you like, of Rabba Bar Chana in his halacha, particularly as far as sukkah is concerned, beyodecha, in your hand. The kulu amaroi kaimei kavosei the sukkah, because every amora rules like him when it comes to the din of sukkah. Well, does that make sense even? Share screen again. This is Rabbi Yosef has just said, which is why I highlighted this one. He says, take seriously the view of Rabbi Bar Chana in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, because everyone holds like him when it comes to sukkah, all the Amoram. But that's not true. It's true that he has the same view as Rodin, all 7 days, here as well. But we just said Rabbi Yehuda in the name of Shmuel says day 1 only. So what does this Gemara mean? What does he mean to say? Well, Rabbi Yosef seems to say there's no holding back on Rabbi Bar Chana. He's always right when it comes to sukkah, and no one disputes him. Well, we just said there is a dispute. Let's just hold that in mind for a moment. It causes some trouble understanding this piece of Gemara. I mean, the easiest way of understanding is simply that Rabbi Yosef is saying that Rabbi Bar Chana, in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, is an authority, and that we should take him as an authority in the view of Rabbi Yochanan. And therefore, if he says day 1 and then all 7 days, day 1 for lulav and all 7 days for sukkah, then we should take that view seriously. Particularly, as we'll see in a moment, when it comes to this view of all 7 days, which is what we do. As opposed to Rabbi Yehuda Bar Shmuel says day 1, we should take the view of Rabbi Bar Yochanan, which is also that of Robbins, by the way, that all 7 days we make a bracha on the sukkah. That's what Rabbi Yosef is saying. Now the Gemara asks the question, Mesaveh. Gemara asks a kasha from a brisa. It'll become more clear as we do this brisa. And this is a very interesting brisa because it takes us beyond that of the specific mitzvah bracha that we make for, shall we say, lulav and also for the sukkah, to the mitzvah of shehechionu. the mitzvah of Shechianu, which we make usually the first time we do a mitzvah, and it will bring us into a discussion of the mitzvah of Shechianu. And of course, over here, we're not talking about making a Shechianu where you wear on a new clothing or buy a new car or whatever it is, or move into a new house. There may be a need of Shechianu there as well. We're talking about when you make a Shechianu on a mitzvah, on a ritual mitzvah. So let's read the brisa. And when we read the brisa, we will come across some surprises. But the Gemara is going to use this brisa not so much for the surprises, but in order to raise a problem with what Rabbi Yosef said, that we should agree with Rabbi Bar Chana in the name of Rabbi Yosef, that his view in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. The Gemara is going to use this for a question. But let's study the brisa. The brisa itself has a lot of interesting information before we even get to the kasha. The kasha we arrive at in a few moments' time. So the brisa says the following: Ha'osa lulav la'atzmo. We just moved on to Mem Vav Amid Aleph to the top of the page. One who makes a lulav for himself. What does that mean? So all the Mefarshim understand that means he's binding a lulav. He's not growing it on a tree. He's got a lulav and he's going to bind it together with the aravot and the hadassim and put them together in their pekel, ready for the mitzvah of Arba Minim. So someone who's doing the binding, preparing his lulav. Omer Baruch Shechianu v'kimonu v'gyon azman hazer. It means Baruch Ato Hashem Elokeinu, etc., etc. It's our nusach of the bracha Shechianu. He makes a Shechianu on the binding of the lulav, the first time he binds it together prior to the mitzvah he's going to perform on day one. He makes a Shechianu. Do we? No. We don't make one on the binding. You see, you could bind the lulav and esrog together even 3 or 4 days before Sukkot. And according to this view in the brisa, you make a Shechianu on the binding whenever you do the binding. So let's just follow the brisa, even though it is not the way in which we rule today. And you say Shechianu. Netolo, not seispo, when he takes it on Yom Tov, which could be a few days later, to fulfill his mitzvah, as we all do, Omer, he then makes the bracha, Baruch Ato Hashem Elokeinu v'chol ha'amad she'ikri sham mitzvos v'tzvonu al netilas lulav, the bracha of taking the lulav. And it gives us the nusach over here. So if you didn't know where the bracha was for the lulav, you'd find it here in the brisa. So he makes the bracha al netilas lulav. No, nothing controversial. He's making a bracha on the lulav. For afal pi, now the brisa carries on. Afal pi sheberech olav yom rishon, even though he's made a bracha on day one, al netilas lulav, choz mevorach kol shiva. So this is according to the view that you carry on, you make a bracha on the lulav each day of the 7 days. Yes, he says it each day, but he doesn't make another Shechianu. He just makes the netilas lulav each day. Just to remind us what we do, on the first day, we make our bracha netilas lulav, and we then make a Shechianu on day one only. Why? Because it's the first time we're doing this mitzvah for this particular chag. So we say Shechianu on the mitzvah. So we today don't make a bracha of Shechianu on the binding of the lulav and esrog, which could be earlier on. We make the bracha when we first do the mitzvah, which is not in accordance with this view here, which brings the Shechianu forward to the binding of the lulav itself. But what it does have is a daily bracha of al netilas lulav. So that's the opinion, the opinion here in relation to lulav. The brisa carries on. This brisa is not a machlokas. The brisa now gives us the dealing with sukkah. So far we've done the mitzvah of lulav. We said Shechianu when you make the lulav, bind it together, netilas lulav only on the lulav, and you do that each day. Now, ha'osa sukkah la'atzmo, someone who's making a sukkah for himself, Omer, he says, Baruch Ato Hashem Elokeinu Shechianu v'kimonu. Again, something we don't do. When you make your sukkah, which you can make your sukkah at any time after Rosh Hashanah, or you can make it any time you want anyway, but most people wait until, after Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur, but it's well before Sukkot. I guess when it says when it's making, it means when you're putting the schacha. The schacha is the most important part of making a sukkah. When you first put the schacha, you should shochel a little bit, put your head in your hands and make a bracha of the Shechianu, because you are creating the chayfetz shel mitzvah. That's what the Brisa says here, just like when you're binding your lulav. Nichlas leisheva, on the first night when he comes in to sit in the sukkah, Omer, Asher Kiddishonu b'mitzvosav v'tzivonu leishev b'sukkah. He makes the brach of leishev b'sukkah, nothing controversial. Obviously, it's we do as well when we make Kiddush on the first night. But he doesn't make another Shechianu according to this. We do. We make our first Shechianu in the sukkah on the first night of Sukkot to commemorate the new mitzvah that we're just about to embark on. According to this view here, you've made it already when you build the sukkah. When we make our Shechianu, by the way, just before we sit in the sukkah, rather than when we're making the sukkah, in a sense that actually the poskim say you should keep in mind that bracha, this Shechianu, does actually count, not just for the sitting in the sukkah, but for the making as well. But this Brisa says you do it while you're making it. That's a big difference, that you make the Shechianu when you're making the sukkah itself. Kivan shebeirach, after he's made that bracha on the sukkah on the first night, b'yom rishon, shuv eino mevorech. So this is the opinion that you don't make the sukkah bracha ever again. You don't make another leisha for sukkah at all, right? So this is one of those opinions that we found before. And the Gemara is going to say straight away, kasha lulav al-lulav and kasha sukkah al-sukkah. This brisa seems to contradict what we said before. So I'm going to share my screen with you. Then we're going to go and discuss these things in a little bit more detail. The brisa is what I'm bringing you here. The brisa says lulav all 7 days. Just now, we've just done that. The lulav all 7 days, and sukkah day one only. What did Rabbi Baba Chona say? That was a view that was promoted as being the authoritative one, the opposite to the brisa, that lulav is day one only, and sukkah is all 7 days. The brisa says that lulav is all 7 days, and the sukkah is day one only. Now the Gemara says this is very difficult, because the brisa is authoritative, because it is a Tanaitic view, and therefore it needs to be followed by any Amora, any later rabbi. It has no choice, unless he has another Tana to follow. He has to follow the view of the Brisa. How can we then say that we should rule according to the statement of Rabbi Baba Chona in the name of Rabbi Yochanan? These are Amoraim. They cannot argue with the Brisa. So the Gemara is promoting this as a kasha against the view we just said, that the lulav is day one only and the sukkah is all 7 days. Yeah, which was promoted as being the correct view. Remember, the Gemara said, "Nekot b'yodacha," hold this view in your hand because it's the right one. What we see is the wrong one now, because the Brisa just said something different, and there's no way an American can argue with a Brisa unless he has his own support. So the Gemara says on this, essentially what I've already expressed. Kasha lulav al-lulav, kasha sukkah al-sukkah. That there's a kasha on both halachas, the lulav halacha and the sukkah halacha, between what we just read in the Brisa and that of Rabbi Bar Chona in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. As I've shown, this contradicts both the halacha on the case of lulav and also on the case of sukkah. And the Gemara is going to, in a moment, try and resolve this contradiction. It's not acceptable to have Amoraim making a statement which is at odds with the Brisa, because they should have been aware of all the Braitot, and they should have to follow the view of the Braita because it is authoritative and predates them. So therefore, if we have the situation like this, we have to find why the situation has arisen. But just before we do this, I wanted to spend just a little bit of time on the on the Tosfot over here. Tosfos brings an interesting question. I'm going to share my screen because I've actually written out the Tosfos, or I've rather transposed it in a way that's more readable. It's on Mem Vav Amud Aleph. It's the second Tosfot on the left column. Ha'osa Sukol Atzmo Mevorach Shechianu. here we have some discussion of Tosfot, and it's quite an important Tosfot because he sets out some of the principles of what Shechion is all about. You imagine there are two threads that are running through this disputes that we're seeing over here. One thread is the thread of what do you do on Sukkot and what do you do on the mitzvah of Sukkah and the mitzvah of Lulav. Which one do you say once only, and which one do you say a bracha all 7 days? Does it depend on whether it is a continual mitzvah? Does it depend upon whether it's one's a minhag Torah or drabonon? Those are the considerations we've seen before. But the second thread is the making of the Shechionu, which was introduced to us rather en passant because it's in this brisa. And the brisa over here, we just read, makes reference to the need to make Shechionu on the making of the mitzvah, the making of the chayfetz shel mitzvah, the binding of the lulav, or the building of the sukkah, which is not something we often do. And yet over here it's down as a halacha. So Tosfos is curious to know, when do you make such a bracha and when do you not make it? So let's have a read of this Tosfot together. I'm afraid it's not punctuated, but at least you've got square Hebrew print rather than Rashi print. So let's learn it together. So ha'osa sukkah la'atzmo mevorach shechionu. That's the heading on this Tosfot. So Tosfos says, Torach lefarish, one should try and explain tam, the reasoning. My shana, the yesh mitzvahs. Why is it that there are some mitzvahs shetakinu levorach shechionu, that Chazal made it a kana that we should make shechionu? But yesh mitzvahs shalotakinu, and there are mitzvahs in which they didn't institute the saying of shechionu. What's this all about? So he sets it out more clearly now. But asiyah sukkah v'lulav, when it comes to building the sukkah and the lulav, we've just said, takinu, they did make an institution to say shechionu, keda ashkachon hocha, as we have found in this brisa. Now, the fact is that we don't actually follow it in practice, but Tosfos is not talking about what we follow in practice. He's talking about what we see here, formally stated in the brisa. There is a mitzvah to say shechionu over the building of the sukkah and making of the lulav. And yet, in contrast, says Tosfos, what I don't understand, he says, uvasiyas tzitzis utfilin lo takinu. When it comes to the making of tzitzis and tefillin, there is no shechionu. In other words, if you go into a sofa who's making tefillin, or into a little tzitzis factory where they're tying the threads for tzitzis and placing them on the talus, you don't see people make any bracha, either the beginning of the day or the end of the day, or on each tefillin, or whatever, on each bias that they're stitching together. No such bracha is made on the building of the chayfetz shel mitzvah. Why should making a box of tefillin be any different than building a sukkah? Why should tying the threads of a tzitzis be any different than binding a lulav with yarovas and hadassah? That's the curious question that Tosfos is raising. As we see clearly in Perek HaTcheles, and he's referring to another in I think in Menachos, to Mefarish Rabbi Yochanan, my mevorach HaTefillin shel yad. The Gemara then says, what brachos do you make on tefillin? Or tefillin shorosh? And it's only talk about the brachos when you put them on. That's the point. Ve'ilu la'asos tefillin no mevorach. When it comes to making tefillin, no one comes through with any view that you make a shechionu. Delo choshev le doesn't seem to be important in any way that we need to commemorate it by making a brach. Ukamokain, similarly, yesh l'daktek the shechionu nami lo mevorach midelo, not only midelo choshev la, chen pidyon haben. Also mentions pidyon haben mevorach shechionu. We do make a bracha on pidyon haben, kite isabeso perek habib sochem, ve'ilu amila. But on Mila, now he's talking about other types of mitzvahs like pidyon haben. There is a shechionu in the pidyon haben ceremony, but not on bris milah. Lo mevorach midelo choshev b'parshas b'perek HaTcheles. It's not mentioned there that we make a shechionu on bris milah. What could be a bigger mitzvah than to be machnis the tinuk, the bris shel Avraham Avinu? We're bringing him into a new existence where he's now formally a Jew, no shechionu. Why not? By the way, the Gemara, the answer usually given for bris milah is, since bris milah is painful for the child, you don't make a shechiyonu on something that gives pain? So you can answer that question. Tosfos is not bringing this answer over here, but that's often stated. Ubesofer as Rabbi Eliezer de Mila, this is a perik in Shabbos, Tavkot Kuf Lamed Zayin. It's also not mentioned Bahadi Bracha Shemila. It's not mentioned that shechiyonu should be made. V'chein akriyas Megillah mavar shechiyonu. But we do make a shechiyonu before we read the Megillah. You remember that's what the Baal Korah always does. It's one of his brachas. As well as Al Mikra Megillah, he makes a shechiyonu. Kid Issa Beresh HaKoros Megillah, as you find in the perik of Koros Megillah, Megillah Ome. Ve'ilu akriyas Hallel lo mavarech. But now we're going to, if we want to recite Hallel, even let's say the first day of Pesach, Hallel is also a mitzvah. Hallel is a mitzvah drabanan, so is Kriyas Megillah. Why is there no shechiyonu on the mitzvah of Hallel? So he's raised a number of questions, and he's not going to answer them, by the way, terribly satisfactorily, Tosfos. Very often we say that the kasha is better than the teretz. But over here we see we're already used to when we say a shechiyonu, when we don't say a shechiyonu. Tosfos is asking as a curious first-timer, so to speak. I want to know what the parameters are for introducing a shechiyonu before doing a mitzvah. And not introducing a shechiyonu. What are the rules? They cannot be random. That's what Tosfos is saying. So let's have a look and see what he gives us an answer. The nira, this is where we are. It appears, Tosfos means to say, it appears to me that the only answer that makes any sense is the mitzvah sheyesh oleh or simcha. Any mitzvah which is one of simcha, tiknu shechiyonu. They instituted a shechiyonu. Uda omrinin b'haroa, and we see in Perik Haroa, that's Perik and Brachas, the mevorech al kelim chadoshim, that we make a bracha on new clothes and new things we buy. Here's Tosfos mentioning something we all know about, because we have simcha. Kosef Rav Shri Ragon, the lo samchin Allah, the maskin the Perik kol ma'arvin, the in the midid osim is man. But Rav Shri Ragon says that cannot be the only criterion. And in fact, a major criterion is that we make a mitzvah, a bracha on a mitzvah that comes at a regular interval, but only at with big intervals in between. So we wouldn't make a shechiyonu because we made a bracha and took this mitzvah today and do it again tomorrow. But like sholish regolim type mitzvahs, since they come mizman lizman, and they have an element of simcha in, we will make a bracha. Now that may help a little bit. I don't know if it helps. Does it help as far as bris milah is concerned? Is there no simcha in bringing a child into the bris of Avraham Shel Avinu? It's a very big simcha. It's a one-off bracha, though. In this case, it's only made on a single occasion. You could say it's not mizman. Right? It doesn't come at regular intervals. You can only circumcise your son once normally, not more than once. And therefore, and that together with the fact that the simcha, if you like, is somehow reduced by the level of pain to the infant, maybe is a reason we wouldn't make a shechiyonu or milah. But why do we make it on Pidyon Haben then? Okay, that's simcha, but it's also just a one-off. It's not mizman lizman. Doesn't fit in very well into that category either. How does it explain why we make a bracha of shechiyonu on a sukkah and on lulav when we make them, but not on tzitzis and tefillin? Isn't he trying to answer that question? How has he answered that question? So one of the answers, actually, I have seen that there is a difference based upon mizman lizman. Which would work a little bit. Tzitzis is not a mitzvah that comes as man lizman, because in theory, if you put tzitzis on a beged, you could wear that one on forever. Unlike a sukkah, which you make mizman. Each year, you do something to wiggle your schach, if you like, and therefore it's a zman lizman mitzvah. Tefillin's the same. Someone makes a pair of tefillin, they should last a lifetime. So it's not a zman lizman mitzvah. It is a one-off mitzvah. You could say chad pa'ami, as they say on plastic kalim. And therefore, it is not one that requires a shechiyonu. Lulav is mizman lizman, because each year, just like sukkah, we come back again into our cycle of doing the mitzvah. So that might be the reason that we don't make a shechionu on some of these other mitzvahs, whereas we do on the sukkahs mitzvahs, which are mizman lizman. Okay, I've sort of tried to go around some of these. The answers are not perfect, and I'm sure every case requires its own discussion. Let's just go back to what we do in practice as far as shechionu is concerned on the lulav and on sukkah. Remember, I said we do not follow this brisa whereby we make the shechionu on the making of a mitzvah, but rather the first time we actually perform the mitzvah. So it's when we first take the lulav and make our nitilat lulav on the first day, we say a shechionu as well. The first night of Sukkot that we're going to sit in the sukkah, we make the bracha of shechionu before we make our leishuf sukkah. So that's how we do it. We should hold in mind, in a sense, that the shechionu is not only to cover the performance of the mitzvah, but also the making of the mitzvah as well. That's what we should hold in mind. When it comes to, I did see another explanation when it comes to the lulav, why we don't make a shechionu when we're making the lulav, but I found this a rather strange explanation. And there's an interesting one historically. According to this view, the lulav, maybe to a lesser extent, the sukkah as well, neither of these mitzvahs are ones that are always performed by everyone. And since they may only be performed by a few people, there isn't a general mitzvah to make a bracha of shechionu, because it's only a minority of people who will get the opportunity to make the bracha. Now, I can see it most clearly with lulav. So what I've seen this incredible explanation. Why don't we make a bracha of shechionu when we make the lulav? Shall I tell you why? Because it's not one that is performed by most people. What's the background to this? Don't we all put our lulavim and esrogim and hadassim and arobas together ourselves? The answer is that during a large part of history, and you read about these, these Hasidic stories as well, many people did not have their own lulav and esrog. And they used a communal lulav and esrog. And you don't have to go back very far to see that used to be done. That is that the gabbai of a shul, if he was lucky, he might have one set for the whole shul. And then everybody would be, if you like, loaned the lulav and esrog each day to make a bracha, and he would hand it back. Matana al manat lahachse, as we explained once on the first day. But it would be loaned and given back. So the only person putting the lulav together in that case would be the gabbai of the shul. There's only one lulav. So to say that a bracha of shechionu should be made prior to putting the lulav and esrog kit together would only give that schus to one man. It would give it only to the person putting it together. And that would seem a little bit unfair to institute a bracha and say there's a shechionu to on putting together your lulav and esrog, when it only means that one person in your neighborhood is able to perform that mitzvah. A shechionu would not be instituted. It wouldn't be mandated for such a mitzvah because it's in the hands, if you like, of so few people. I don't see that as being a good excuse for not making a shechionu actually when you're building the sukkah. But as I say, when you sit in the sukkah the first time, you're supposed to have it in mind. Something else, I just want to point out a little diuk over here, which is interesting. It said ha'osa lulav la'atzmo, and it said ha'osa sukkah la'atzmo. What does it mean la'atzmo? La'atzmo. Why doesn't it just say ha'osa sukkah, ha'osa lulav? A person who makes a lulav for himself, a person who makes a sukkah for himself. Well, the answer actually is quite straightforward, because the brisa is coming to exclude a situation where you're doing it for someone else. So if someone is building a sukkah for you, if the brisa had just said ha'osa sukkah, Mevorech shechionu, then your sukkah builder who's building 18 sukkahs today and he's getting paid a fortune, he lives all year round through his income for building a sukkah, that guy would be making a shechionu when he's building the sukkah, because it just says over here, someone building. But he's not doing it le'atzmo. The shechionu is only made if you're making the sukkah for yourself, in the brisa's view, or you're making the lulav for yourself. Why? And here you can look a little bit into what Tosfos says, because there's an element of simcha. The guy you pay from up the road, from Medrash Shmuel, to put your sukkah together, and you pay him something, he doesn't have simcha. Well, in a sense, maybe he has simcha because he's earning 100 shekels for it, but he doesn't have the simcha shel mitzvah because he's building your sukkah. And Tosfos says that's an element behind the reasoning for saying Shechionu. And therefore, since he doesn't have a personal simcha shel mitzvah, he doesn't say Shechionu. If you're building it for yourself, that's when you have the simcha shel mitzvah. Well, it depends how good a builder you are. I mean, it's a trauma to build a sukkah if you're not a very good sukkah builder. But there's still this idea that you're doing something with your hands which is going to give you the wherewithal to accomplish a mitzvah. Okay, let me just close the.
Can I just ask something?
Yes.
I always look at Shechionu as a very existential bracha, that you are alive for this in this season, that you're still there to experience this season, which, if you're making tzitzis, if you're doing any of these things, has nothing to do with it. But some people, I didn't do it, and I don't think under the chuppah, when you get to the marriage, they say Shechionu, putting on the talis and so on.
Yes. You can make, you're looking for a rationale really based upon the wording of the mitzvah. Let me ask you then, George, supposing you were an experienced, it's a bit of a strange case. Let's say you're quite an experienced sofa and you worked for a tefillin factory. And then your boss said to you, George, your pair of tefillin looks a bit worn out. You can make your own pair of tefillin here, work on it. And you start to work on your own pair of tefillin because you were able to do so and you had all the tools, but it was for you personally. Would you say that Shechionu was not relevant, or maybe the wording would be relevant in that situation?
I don't think I would, but anyway.
Okay, that's a little bit nearer to the making of a sukkah.
Yeah, here are sukkahs, and here, it's
yeah. And that's what Tosfos is bringing over here, Mizman. That was the extra thing Rav Shri Gaon added. But it's something you're saying, I was able to do it last year, and thank God I've survived another year, and I can do it again. That's precisely the reasoning of Rav Shri Gaon. But Tosfos didn't bring it himself. He then brings it later on. There was this vacuum really as to. There's nowhere in the Gemara that actually says, here are the criterion for saying Shechionu. All you find is an awful lot of case histories. Yeah. And Tosfos is trying to reconstruct the rationale behind it.
There's another case when for learning, where you say Lasok in the morning, you say every morning to occupy yourself with the learning of the Torah. And you don't say a bracha every time you pick up a Gemara.
Yes.
It covers the whole
day. Tosfos talks about that. And actually he said very interestingly there, to ask the kasha about it. It's not at all clear why it should cover the whole day, why you shouldn't make a new Birchas HaTorah when you've come home from work in the evening and you decide you're going to Daf Yomi share. You've had an awful amount of interruptions. Why isn't it now a completely new mitzvah?
Because also when we go to the bathroom, we only say the prayer in the morning and we don't do it
And we don't do it again. Well, why don't we do it again later on? Because surely you're coming into the learning afresh with a big interruption.
Yeah.
He says that he gives a rationale for that. Every case has its own rationale. He gives a rationale there that you don't make a new La Soap or Bachabon or whatever it is you might want to make, because he says every Jew, you tell me whether this is true of you or whether it's true of anyone that you know, every Jew, when he goes out to work or to do anything, realizes what he's doing is a bit b'diavad. Really, he should be learning. So in a sense, at the back of his mind is that he's diverted his learning time for working in order to make a parnasa. And the very fact that that is at the back of his mind bridges between the learning he does in the morning, or the bracha in the morning, and when he gets to learn again in the evening. It's the realization that the need to learn Torah is a continuous one. That's enough, even if you're not learning itself. It's a very beautiful explanation.
Yeah.
But it's an excuse. It's clearly it's an excuse. So this whole question of brachas is an interesting, difficult one, because there are so many exceptions to so many different rules. And we're just going through some of them over here, and therefore there's no clear line.
Right.
Okay, let's just go back to the Gemara over here. The Gemara, we might have forgotten the Gemara, but the Gemara has just asked us a kasha. I just share screen. I go back to the table. The Gemara originally had said that this opinion of Rabbi Bar Bar Chana and Rabbi Yochanan, Nakot Biyodacha, this is a very authoritative opinion. Lulav 1 day only, Sukkah all 7 days. And then a kasha was asked from this brisa, which would be even more authoritative because it's a Tanaitic view. And it says, all Lulav all 7 days and Sukkah day 1 only. That's precisely the opposite of the opinion of Rabbi Bar Bar Chana. So that it's a kasha against this idea that Rabbi Bar Chana's opinion here is one to be taken into halacha. How can he make that opinion against a brisa which says the diametric opposite? That's what the Gemara said. Kasha lulav lulav kasha sukkah. So we're going to take it up again in the Gemara. So the Gemara answers, Bishlama lulav lulav. Says the Gemara, I can resolve even before you try and answer my kasha, says the Gemara. I'll give you an answer. I'll answer one side of the kasha, but I can't answer the other side. I can understand, says the Gemara, the difference of opinion in relation to lulav, that Rabbi Bar Bar Chana said in Rabbi Yochanan day 1 only, and the brisa says all 7 days. I can live with this apparent contradiction. Why? Because I can explain it. Lo kasha. I can say it is not really difficult to explain. Kan bisman shebeis hamikdash kayim. Kan bisman she'ein beis hamikdash kayim. I can say that depends upon the time period in Jewish history that those different opinions applied. Remember that Rabbi Bar Bar Chana, the son of Rabbi Yochanan, in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, he said day 1 only. So he's talking about later period. He's an Amora. So maybe the reason he says you only take it 1 day is because he doesn't live at the time of the Beis HaMikdash. And he certainly, and there's nowhere in the world when these Amora are in live where Lulav and Esrog is any more a 7-day mitzvah. And since it's only a day 1 mitzvah min ha-Torah and the other days are rabbinic, maybe that's why you hear Rabbi Bar Chana and Rabbi Yochanan saying day 1 only, because in his age it was a day 1 only. Whereas the brisa is expressing the halacha for when there is a Beis HaMikdash and you're in Yerushalayim. Because remember, there we said, Lifnei Hashem Elokeichem Shivas Yomim. It was 7 days. And therefore, the brisa is referring to the halacha when you're in the Beis HaMikdash, during the times of the Beis HaMikdash, and it's a 7-day mitzvah, then you should make the bracha all 7 days. That might explain this discrepancy between Rabbi Bar Bar Chana and the brisa. The brisa is an earlier source. Very many of the brisas are, if you like, they standing at the time of the Beis HaMikdash, and they're referring to the halachas at the time. So we could explain the discrepancy between Rabbi Bar Bar Chana and the brisa simply on the basis that they're talking about different epochs in time. Ella, says the Gemara, sukkah as sukkah kasha. But I cannot explain discrepancy between sukkah and sukkah between these opinions. Rabbi Bar Bar Chana said all 7 days you make a bracha for sukkah, for sitting in the sukkah, and the brisa says day 1 only. Here, there's no such explanation of the time of the Beis HaMikdash is different to the time afterwards. It's only vis-a-vis Lulav and Esrog. Everywhere, at all times, at all periods, the mitzvah of sukkah is a 7-day mitzvah. Whether you're in Chutz La'aretz, whether you're in Eretz Yisrael, whether you're living this man Beis HaMikdash or after Beis HaMikdash. And yet, we're seeing over here day 1 only for the brisa, and Rabbi Bar Chana says all 7 days. And that is not a discrepancy, says the Gemara, that I can understand. How can Rabbi Bar Bar Chana say all 7 days when the brisa says clearly day 1 only? That's not an allowable discrepancy. So the Gemara answers, you know what? And very often we find an answer like this, as we see frequently, Tanoihi. This difference of opinion between Rabbi Bar Bar Chana on Sukkah, where he says all 7 days, and the brisa says you only have to make it the first night, if you like, the first day only, is the subject of a machlokus between Tanoim. And what does that mean? That the brisa is Tanaitic, it says day 1 only, but Rabbi Bar Bar Chana, in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, here, where he said all 7 days, which is different, is not just Rabbi Baba Chana and Rabbi Yochanan's opinion. They actually base it on a Tana elsewhere. In other words, they hold of the view of a Tana, and the Brisa holds the view of a different Tana. In other words, there are two different Tanoim who argue, and that's not going to be a problem anymore. It's a problem because we've got a difference in halacha. Okay, but it's not breaking any rules. The Brisa that says day one only is the opinion of Tana A, and Rabbi Baba Chana, the name Rabbi Yochanan, that says all 7 days is actually the opinion of Tana 2. And Rabbi Baba Chana, in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, is entitled to take the view of either of these two Tanoim. As long as he holds on to the strings of one Tana, he's all right. Doesn't matter which one. And we are going to show that there is a Tana that holds all 7 days, which so far we haven't seen. And therefore that gives Rabbi Baba Chana and Rabbi Yochanan the right to actually hold of that opinion. And that will exonerate Rabbi Baba Chana and Rabbi Yochanan, and they're not taking a view which is their own, which contradicts that of Tanaitic sources. They actually follow a Tanaitic source, but it's a source that we haven't yet come across, and it comes across next. Just do the next few words of the Gemara to introduce a new Brisa. Where is there another Tanaitic view, which is the one that Rabbi Baba Chana and the name Rabbi Yochanan follows? It is the Tanya Tefillin, and now we're going to move to a case of Tefillin, and we're going to extrapolate from the opinions as far as Bracha and Tefillin is concerned to the extrapolated to the counterpart mitzvahs of Sukkah and Lulav. We're going to stretch the rule of Tefillin across to that of Lulav and Esrog, where we're also going to have the basic question: how many times does a person make a bracha on Tefillin? Now, normally we make a bracha before we put the pair of Tefillin on. But suppose we have to take them off for whatever reason, and then we are, as the Mefarshim say, the righteous sages used to wear Tefillin on all day. But they didn't wear it on all day. They had to do things. They had to go into the fish market every now and again where it was smelly. They had to use the Sheretim from time to time. They had to, whatever it is that they had to do, which was not of a nature that entitled them to keep their Tefillin on, would mean that they would have to take them off and then put them on again. Is it a one-off bracha, or is it one that requires a new bracha each time? That's going to be the basis on which we're going to compare the a Tana's opinion in Tefillin stretched across to that of Sukkah as well. But we won't do that now. I'm just going to stop over here. We will take up that Brisa, and we'll see how it accords with the view of Rabbi Bar Chana in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. And then the Gemara is going to spend quite a lot of time on the halachas of brachas on Tefillin. We'll find various minhagim, what people used to do. There'll be a little bit of a diversion into the depths of Tefillin before we come back again to the general topic of brachas for Lulav and Sukkah. Okay, I will quit recording. Where's my recording icon?